So a little over a month ago, we started getting a ton of new information on possible new content and features we could get in the future of Diablo 4. And all of this information comes from some surveys that were sent out to random people. And all of this information comes from a post on the official Diablo 4 forums that I'll have linked in the description, where they lay out all of the information that was asked in this survey. And there was a ridiculous amount of potential new content and systems that they were asking about in this. Now, if you've never taken any of these surveys or you don't know how they're generally run, they will add things into these official surveys that are never meant to be added to the game or aren't actually what the survey is asking about. They just add in different things to try to keep you off of the trail of what they're actually asking for. Because there's just a ton of systems and possible content in this survey, so they don't want you trying to sniff out what they're actually thinking of adding to the game. So they'll throw in different options that are just supposed to keep you off the trail because they want to know what you would be excited about and what you would like to see in the game, but they don't want to tell you future updates for the game. So keep that in mind. Some of this stuff is just things that are thrown in that is not actually something they're thinking about adding to the game. But I will say there are options in the survey that have absolutely been teased to us previously by developers. So some of this stuff I think is actually being developed and is probably somewhat close to being added to the game. And I would not be surprised if a handful of these more interesting things are actually coming either with the next expansion or sometime in 2026. So we'll just start going through this list and stop at the more interesting ones because the first handful of ones are things that we're absolutely getting. So the first one is just a campaign, a 10-hour campaign continuing the story of the Diablo universe in Diablo 4. We will definitely be getting that in the next expansion. A new class, we're certainly getting that in the next expansion. A lot of people want the Paladin. I think it's definitely going to be a holy based class. A new zone with distinct visual elements that's appeared in previous Diablo titles. We're definitely getting a new zone. Whether it was in a previous Diablo title, not sure on. New monsters with new models and abilities. We will be getting that with a new expansion. We've gotten that with seasons as well. New monster abilities. We'll be getting that with new seasons and expansions. A new mount type outside of the horse or the cat we got. We're almost certainly going to get that with the new expansion, maybe even sooner or with other seasons. But then we get to one of the most interesting ones, new crafting systems. A flexible and extensible crafting system featuring a brand new suite of materials for crafting and item modification. This is something that we have been teased as well. Back when we got the overhaul to gear and affixes and we got the tempering and masterworking system, that was one of the main points of this system, to make the base gear drops much more simple with less stats on them, so they're much easier to read. It's much easier to find the gear you're looking for, but then you take that gear on a journey through all the crafting systems, and tempering and masterworking were supposed to be the first of those crafting systems. And I'm very much hoping that at the end of the 2025 seasons, when we've gotten overhauls to most of the major systems of the game, that going into the next expansion and 2026 seasons, that we start just getting new additions to the game, and that's primarily what we're getting. And I'm hoping that early on in 2026, we get some new crafting systems. And then we have new skills for the existing classes, new active and passive skills. We're almost certainly getting this with the new expansion. I'm hoping we start getting more of this. We have already been told that within 2025, the developers are looking at some amount of changes to our skill trees, whether that be just new customization options and new skills or passives, or that's a big overhaul. We don't know yet, but we're almost certainly getting this. A new skill tree layout update, an update to the skill tree that adds new pathing and routing options between existing and new skills, allowing for new combinations and greater build quality. This is something that we already got. I think it was with the expansion where some of the passives would connect to skills. So if you were going into that skill and one of the passives you wanted was like one of the deeper passives, you could get it more easily. So they added some new connections there. Hopefully they keep adding new connections, and whenever we get this update to the skill tree, hopefully it's a bigger overhaul, but even just adding new connections just makes the skill tree better and more interesting. So that's an easy way they can make the skill tree a bit more interesting, just changing the layout. Then we have skill customization. This is something that was also teased previously, and this is something that going into season 9 seems like they're directly testing for. I do also want to make a video specifically going over this, but skill customization, new passive skills in the talent tree that modify skill attributes such as elemental type, projectile quantity, shape, frequency, etc. And we did get a tease that we could change the elemental type of skills in the past. In one of the developer live streams, it was kind of directly teased. This is definitely something that would absolutely be a massive upgrade to the game, allowing us to change the elemental type of skills through our skill trees. Being able to change like pulverize on a druid from an earth skill to like a poison skill would be just massive changes, allowing a sorcerer to change their hydras to like a frost hydra just as another passive in their skill tree would be absolutely massive. But it also seems that the heraldic powers of season 9 actually seem to be testing for this. If you haven't seen this yet, the heraldic powers in season 9 is basically build your own skill. You start with these 5 catalysts, which are essentially the actual skills you're choosing. You link them to one of your class skills, and whenever you use that class skill, if the catalyst skill's cooldown is up, it'll just use that with it. But everything else about the power system of season 9 is to customize it. There are infusions that change the elemental damage type and add new powers. There are arcana, which are these passive skills that add more area effect. They add more damage or more range, or they do a bunch of different other passive effects, hitting a lot of the things that are in this survey question. So I would very much be surprised if we don't see a lot of these learnings from season 9's power going into the skill tree in the future. And then we have a Paragon update, an update to existing Paragon boards, as well as new boards for each class, allowing for a greater build variety. This is something I pretty much fully expect. The Paragon boards, I think, are actually in a pretty decent spot now that we only have 5. So I'd expect any updates to existing trees would just be trying to make them a bit more interesting and then giving us more boards for more options. I think the Paragon boards is actually one of the systems that is pretty good right now. I do hope we at some point get like one unique glyph or a handful of unique glyphs so we can only use one at a time. That would just give us a much greater amount of a build variety, like have these handful of unique glyphs that just do a lot more towards your build. Then we have set bonuses, adds a new avenue for character builds and power progression, a system for socketing key passives and set bonuses in the end game. Now this is a bit interesting how they explain this, because this says a system of socketing key passives and set bonuses in the end game. This sounds very different than what you would expect, which would just be like tier sets or set items of green rarity that we got in like Diablo 3 or previous Diablo games. This sounds like it's almost something different that wouldn't necessarily be that, but we do also know that the developers were working on set pieces even before Diablo 4 was launched. But they said a similar thing to runes, which we got in the first expansion, which was they won't be in at launch, but they want to keep working on them to get them in a spot that's actually good. Because a big issue with set pieces, especially in Diablo 3, is that basically every build was focused around them, and they very much don't want that with Diablo 4. If they were to add the new rarity, the new set pieces, they would want it to not be required for builds. Just have it be another option, which is actually a very difficult thing to do. But then we have a dungeon customization system, a customizable multi-floor dungeon experience where players influence dungeon parameters and difficulty. Players can influence the gear rewards they get at the res end with a high degree of control and accuracy, affixes, greater affixes, etc. Now this is something that I would very much want, and even though we're getting the Nightmare Dungeon overhaul with season 9, this sounds like something very much different. You get a little bit of it with what's coming with season 9, but this sounds like it would be a completely different system. Obviously being a multi-floor dungeon, this would have to be something different, but this sounds like something that would be a massive addition to the game. Have it be this much longer multi-floor dungeon delving experience where we get to kind of choose our difficulty much more easily, kind of choose the rewards, maybe even add in a bit of a roguelike element into it. There's a lot they could do with a system like this, and this would be one of the top spots of a new endgame system I would want added to the game. Make a much longer, more extensive dungeoning experience that's not Nightmare Dungeons, but something that's much more customizable like this is pointing. Now this next option is very interesting because it has one of the longest descriptions, and it's just really interesting if it were to be implemented into the game. And this is called Activity Playlist and Reward Selection. Allow players to have more control over the types of rewards they receive by selecting specific activity and reward pairing. Players can build their activity playlist and earn valuable rewards from various activities across Sanctuary, such as obtaining masterworking materials from Helltide or crafting materials / gold from Nightmare Dungeons. With this feature, you could decide which activities you engage with in order to get the resources needed to progress, giving more agency in how you play. This also helps provide guidance on how to maximize your fun and efficiency post-campaign. So besides them giving a very long description of this sounds like something that they might implement, because in Diablo 4 right now, pretty much every system kind of does something a little bit different. You go to Hell Tides, it's more for boss summoning materials and just random gear and stuff like that. It's kind of more specifically based upon getting your whispers done and getting boss summoning materials. You have Nightmare Dungeons, which are right now specific to Opticide. They're actually going to be going a bit more in that direction in Season 9, where you have all of the different affixes that can give you different rewards and things you can focus on. You have the Pit, which is focused on kind of leveling up, but also for progression, primarily focused on upgrading your glyphs. You have Infernal Hordes, which I think is also a bit more focused on Opticide. You have a bit more options because you can get a good amount of gold and a good amount of gear, but a lot of the endgame systems are a bit focused on something. This would essentially completely change that and just allow you to kind of choose the rewards you want from the content, almost giving you a form of meta progression. If they were to do something like this, what I would actually want is that while they would be kind of balancing the rewards of the entire game, because it would need to do that for this system, is that they would nerf all of these systems. They would nerf all of the rewards of the game. So materials, boss summoning mats, all this type of stuff. They would nerf it at a baseline, but with this system, give us some form of meta progression. So we have these different like skill trees or things to progress into. Let's say I want more Opticite. I can apply the rewards. I could apply Opticite to like Hell Tides or something, and then I could go progress in Hell Tides and get like skill points or some other meta progression to keep buffing up what I actually want to get. That's what I think would actually be the best in this, because while it would nerf everything, because while it would nerf all the rewards at a baseline, it would just allow us to keep progressing and at some point get a lot more rewards than we would be able to before, and essentially just allow us to choose what content we actually want to do. Because I think going into 2026, we're going to start getting a lot more new pieces of content and new content systems where it's going to start to kind of bloat all the content in the game at some point. Changing up to this type of reward structure just allows you to choose the content you want to do and be getting the rewards you want from the content you want to do, which is generally just better. Then we have boss towers, additional bosses to engage with, providing more boss encounter variety in the late game and better target farming potential. Now this is weird. I don't know why they're calling this boss towers, because basically what this is explaining is just more bosses for the boss ladder, which is something we already have. But yes, I think everybody wants to add more bosses in the boss ladder, and that's how we target farm uniques anyway. So yeah, more bosses would be good. Fishing, a collection and interaction feature present in all zones, allowing a player to fish. This would be a non-combat side activity. This is one of those things I think they added in just to add something in to try to keep you off the trail. I don't think this is going to be added into the game. They've done multiple updates since the launch of the game to make sure you're not actually having to like mine ore or gather herbs, to not make it like an MMO where, say in World of Warcraft or something, you go around and actually have to mine the ore or pick the herbs. You just click it, it auto shoots out the loot, and you don't even have to click the loot anymore, it auto picks it up. I don't think they're adding fishing into the game. But then we have a level cap increase level cap from 60 to 70. That's almost certainly happening with the next expansion, whether it's 65 or 70. There's probably going to be a level cap. Then we have endless monster waves of increasing difficulty. This sounds really cool as well. An activity for max level characters in Torment plus difficulties. So this is only for the end game, where you'll face relentless waves of enemies and bosses in a fast-paced chaotic battle, continuing to fight until you fail, either by letting too many monsters spawn or by dying. The more waves completed, the better your rewards. This sounds really cool, and this is something quite a bit different than, say, something like Infernal Hordes, because this is more, it constantly throws things at you, and if you can't keep up with the pace, you start to fail, because it either spawns too many enemies and potentially bosses, and you either die, or there'll probably be like a limit of how many monsters could be spawned in a time before you just fail. And that's actually a pretty good feature to have, because if they just made it where, well, when you die, it's over, you could have an ultra tanky build where monsters could just keep spawning, but you really can't die. And I do think this is a really big possibility. The system is already generally good. Having like a horde mode activity works in a lot of games like this. And next up, we have a boss time attack, a game mode where players have a limited amount of time to defeat as many bosses as they can and are rewarded based on their progress. And I think this is something that's just really good for ARPGs in general. I've been talking for a while about Diablo 4 needing a bigger focus on bosses, or needing more boss-oriented content added into the game. I know we just had the season of bosses, and I do think that that overhaul to the boss ladder system was actually pretty good, but that's not enough yet to allow people to just make boss killing builds and just completely focus on bosses as their progression throughout a season or on that character. Because if you've been playing since the start of the game, you know we didn't even have the boss ladder system at the launch of the game, so bossing builds were completely and utterly useless. They didn't have any uses pretty much anywhere. Then we got the boss ladder system. They added a bit into that. They added more bosses into that. Now we have more bosses and a revamped system, which has been adding more and more of the possibility of you being able to create a bossing build, and that's pretty much all you do with that build, or that's its focus. So it's much stronger at that, but we're still not there yet. But adding more modes like this could be really good. And not only that, but if we go back to one of the earlier points, the activity playlist and reward selection, if they kept adding new bosses and new boss game modes and then allowed us to kind of more tailor focus our rewards to certain aspects in the game, we could get to the point in Diablo 4 where you could start a season, create a build that's only focused on killing bosses, and that could be the majority of your gameplay. Maybe less so starting out and leveling up, but as you get more into the end game, maybe as you get level 60, there could potentially be the point where you create a build that is only focused on killing bosses. You can select the rewards you want from these different boss systems, and that's all you do with that build or for that season. You only go and do the boss ladder system, you go and do this boss time attack mode. Maybe there's other systems they add to their focus on bosses. And while some people may not like to do that, that would just add another element into the game for people that really like that style of content, and will just allow for so many new builds to be created. If we got to that point, you would probably see new tier lists being added to like every Diablo 4 website, because they would have to split up tier lists into tier lists for doing all the other content and then tier lists specific for bosses. And if we got to that point, I think Diablo 4 would actually be in a pretty healthy state. And then next we have new combo skills. Using certain skills in certain orders can provide additional damage bonuses, creating unique visual effects and more. And this is something that we have a little bit of. We're actually getting a little bit more of this, specifically for one of the new druid uniques, where you pulverize on the ground, it creates this poison puddle, and you can keep pulverizing it to spew out smaller puddles. So there are small things like this in the game. Like you have the sorcerer with their wave of flame, where then they shoot projectiles through that and it catches them on fire to do more fire damage. But we don't actually have a ton of these elements, or they're not a really big part of the game. I know when you go to something more recent like Path of Exile 2, that game was supposed to be more focused on that, but how that game was designed, you pretty much can't do it. You just don't have the opportunity to do it at all. So this is a really hard system to pull off, and this is definitely one of those things that sounds like it's just added in. It's not necessarily something they're trying to do a lot more of. It's probably something they're adding in just to get an idea if this is gameplay styles that people like, because we obviously do have a little of that in Diablo 4, but it's probably not something that will ever be a focus unless people absolutely love it, which I don't think would ever be the case either. But then we have Tower of Truth. I will also say, before we get into the description of this, it's a bit weird that they have this named as Tower of Truth. I'm not sure if Tower of Truth is something from another RPG, because some of this stuff will have just been ripped from other RPGs or ARPGs and just put in here, but that is quite interesting. And this is a high score style game mode where players fight to see how far they can go up in a tower each week. Enemies become more difficult at each floor, and certain floors are special floors with either a unique challenge or a unique modifier. Rewards are based on progress, and I know a lot of other games have something like this. I know even specifically a game I played, Lost Ark, which isn't an ARPG in the sense that like Diablo or Path of Exile or Last Epoch are, but has some similar things, and they have this mode where it's just a big tower that you could keep going up, and the farther you go up, the more rewards you get. In that game, that specific tower is one-time rewards, but this idea is also something that is quite interesting. Imagine they add a tower system to Diablo 4 that has 100 floors, and you get rewards weekly for doing it, and every new floor you get to in that week, you just get more and more rewards. And if you complete all 100 floors, you've gotten all the rewards for that week, and then maybe next week you can do the same things again, or maybe they have some amount of a randomized element and they can add different things besides just combat rooms. Maybe one floor is just like a mini horde mode, maybe one floor is a boss, maybe one floor is maybe one floor is a much more unique challenge or has a much more unique modifier. And if they're adding these kind of modifiers to floors, you could see a system like this actually change every week, where maybe it has randomized floors, or maybe it just changes the modifiers on each floor every week to give you some other type of challenge. This could add a pretty unique piece piece of new content if they were to do something like this or in the style of this. And then we have advanced shrines. New shrines appear throughout Sanctuary, offer unique and distinct powers and modifiers, including Pillar of Glory and Pillar of Proving from the Gauntlet. Now, I'm not sure how they would do some of the Gauntlet pillars. I know one of them just essentially respawns all enemies you killed next to it, which could actually be really cool, but this is actually something I think they're going to do sooner than later. I've been thinking about this recently. I think they're going to do a shrine overhaul, and I think that means they're going to buff up all of the shrines we currently have. They're going to make Conduit Shrine actually something useful that's currently not in the game anymore, and they're probably going to add the special effects of one of our events. I forget the name of the event, but one of the events we've gotten buffs up all of the shrines and gives them new effects. Like the Greed Shrine spawns a bunch of goblins as you're getting more and more kills. The Conduit Shrine actually made every time you teleport around, it just sends down all these lightning strikes that actually made it good. The Protection Shrine reflected damage you take while in it, so you're immune to damage and you're reflecting damage. So this is definitely something I think they've probably been working on, or is an idea or a plan they have where they want to buff up all the shrines and then they can add a bunch of new ones, because right now, while shrines can help you in combat for a bit, they definitely leave you wanting something more substantial. And if they do an overhaul to the shrine system, they make all these shrines better, stronger, they add new ones, they could actually add in new effects that try to create a shrine build. I don't think I'll ever forget seeing the Diablo 3 beta where there were items that allowed you to have shrines for a longer amount of time and to just build them up. And I'll never forget seeing people in these betas do full shrine builds where they had every shrine buff and they were just running around absolutely destroying things. It just seemed like such an interesting type of playstyle that I hope if they do a shrine overhaul that they start adding things that allow this to actually happen. We kind of have it with one of the mythics, and they could overhaul that to allow it to play a bigger role into this, but this is definitely something that I think would be really interesting. At a baseline, it would just be better gameplay because you have these stronger shrines, and it makes for more interesting gameplay having these more random elements that really change up how you're playing for a small amount of time. Having the possibility of builds being created around these is even better. And then we have Mercenary combo skills. Mercenary skills can interact with certain skills across classes to produce more powerful and different versions of skills. Examples: Rahir's Ground Slam after Sork's Frost Nova causes a repeated shockwave of mini Frost Novas that continue to chill but don't freeze. It's also interesting that they gave such a specific example of this that makes me think they put a bit more thought into this, but this could be a cool idea. Being able to combo your skills with your Mercenary skill to just make it a stronger version or a different version. But I will say we need a Mercenary overhaul, or we need the Mercenary system expanded, and depending on how the expansion system is going to work in Diablo 4, this may end up coming with the next expansion, because one of the ways they could do the expansion system is how World of Warcraft does it, where you have your expansion, you pay for that expansion, but once the next expansion is getting released, they add every previous expansion to the base version of the game. So in World of Warcraft, that would mean if you just get a monthly sub, you have access to every expansion in that except the newest one. The newest one you have to go buy. And I think there's a good chance they do this, because if they don't do this, players just get further and further away from each other. And if they keep adding expansion specific power systems, this will just mean the people without expansions become way too weak compared to everybody else that has the expansions. And while Mercenaries aren't super interesting right now, they do add a bit of power, so do runes. So I think that's how they're going to go. And I'm hoping what that also means for the Mercenary system is that they expand the Mercenary system, because everybody will have it for free, so they can put a lot more power and interesting things into it. I will probably make another video on this, but my hope for Mercenaries at some point is that they have much larger skill trees so we can actually customize how they're playing, what they're doing. And my hope is also that they remove a lot of the elements that buff us specifically. Like a lot of druid builds I've been using use Variana because she can just give you a bunch of increased attack speed, and that's the main reason you use her and the main reason you use the skills you use on her. So I hope they would remove a bunch of that and just allow us to customize our Mercenaries for themselves and what they're doing. And then I also want a gearing system. Back in Diablo 3, even at the start of the game, you had a few pieces of gear you can put on them, and then in a certain season, one of the mechanics was your Mercenaries could have a full set of gear, and then you could also add some other crazy things to tie back into you. But I hope they start doing that, and that could very well be a big Mercenary overhaul system. We have more of these combo skills, and there's a lot more progression tied into them. And then we have new Uber bosses, unique bosses that are difficult encounters, only accessible via the endgame, and designed to be defeated by fully optimized character builds. I hope they do this. This is something that I think they will probably do, because if you go back in Diablo, at the start of the game, we didn't have the boss ladder system. We got the boss ladder system, and pretty much nothing besides Duriel was actually a max level boss. So all of the starter bosses got really easy when you were level 100 or had a much stronger build. Then we got the kind of overhaul to that system where now all of these bosses had essentially an uber or tormented version of the boss, which basically turned every boss into being able to have an uber version. Then with the difficult changes going into our newest difficulty system, there was no reason to have those anymore. If you increase the difficulty of the game, every boss got their difficulty increased, and bosses and enemies don't actually have levels anymore because of this. My big hope is that they again add in uber versions of all of the bosses, and as they keep adding bosses to the ladder system, every boss would just have two versions. It would have the kind of base version that goes off your difficulty, and then there would be an uber version that's a much more difficult version of those bosses. So I very much hope this is a thing they do, and this is definitely something that's almost certain to happen at some point. Then we have a bounty system, a new set of daily, weekly, and monthly seasonal tasks that players can focus on, complete, and earn rewards. I'm not sure about this. I mean, if they just added this on top of everything else, it would be okay. Just give you some additional stuff to do to get some additional rewards. Really depends on how they actually do this, because if they do a system like this and add a ridiculous amount of rewards into these, but then also kind of balance the game with the idea that these are in the game, this would generally not be liked. I don't think people in Diablo 4 or Diablo games want a ton of kind of like daily or weekly or monthly or seasonal content or anything like that. Seasonal stuff's fine, but daily, weekly, or monthly stuff I don't think is liked as much by players. But again, if it's just like some small additions to get more rewards on top of everything, I think it would generally be fine. Then we have a new power source. This is one of the most interesting ones. I've done a video on this. I think I'll do it again because it's been more apparent that we need this. An alternative power system like in Diablo 3, where players can permanently apply an aspect from an item without having to wear it, bringing new potential twists to builds. This is something that was in Diablo 3 if you don't know. It was the cube, and essentially the cube had 3 different slots, and you could unlock powers to put into these cubes. So essentially what would happen is you would put a power into the cube, you would get that power, but you wouldn't get any of the stats of an item or anything. It was just that power. So imagine we get this cube with, let's say, just 3 slots in it, and we could put 3 legendary aspects into the cube where we just get that aspect power, but we're not getting like stats of another piece of gear or anything. This is something that I think needs to happen in Diablo 4 at this point. We've gotten so many unique, so many legendary powers, and with the constant rebalancing of the game that we get every season, there are so many builds that are 1 or 2 aspects or unique items away from being an incredibly strong, interesting build, but there's just too many slots taken up by things that are pretty much required in all builds. Like the druids still have a legendary aspect that gives you a massive multiplicative damage increase to just all damage based upon your fortify. And pretty much every druid build has a way to easily keep themselves capped on fortify, which is not only a big defensive increase, but any overpower build, which is most strong builds now, also get more damage from it. And then most builds are also using that aspect because it gives a massive damage increase just for something you're already doing. So imagine not even having to change that, just adding in this new power system where you get this cube, you could just put that or another power into the cube where now you free up like 3 legendary aspects. Again, just completely allow new builds to exist. I guarantee you if they just added in the cube from Diablo 3 and allowed you to put legendary aspects into the cube with like 3 different slots, you would have a monumental increase in the amount of like viable endgame builds for whatever season or expansion that was added into. But then finally, we have the last option in the survey, new legendary item affixes. All new legendary affixes expanding the possibility with builds. This is almost assuredly coming, and I hope we get more interesting things as base roles. We got the explanation that going into the new crafting system, so more specifically tempering, we would be getting new, more interesting affixes through the tempering system instead of on base gear. So we got like multiple projectiles or chances for the skill to be cast twice, things like that are more interesting, increasing the size of skills so you can hit your whole screen. There was a lot more interesting affixes in the tempering system. I do think we need much more interesting affixes on gear drops. I think at this point, just add in some really interesting possible affixes on gear drops in general, and I think that will just add a lot of longevity and intrigue back into the game. Because I think legendary gear, once you're in the end game, has gotten a bit boring. Most of the items, except like your jewelry pieces, you are looking for willpower, max life, and then one other third stat that's a bit different depending on exactly what you need. But most of your pieces of gear are willpower, max life. And that gets kind of boring because there's not a lot of other options. Nothing is really better, and those are all kind of basic, boring stats. So I hope they add in much more interesting stats. Now, there are some additional elements to this survey that gives some more information on what could potentially be coming to the future of Diablo 4, but this video is already really long. There's already multiple things in this list that I want to make further videos on, so I'll probably do another video going over the further information because some of the other ones are a bit more like cosmetic focused, so probably go over those in the future. But I do think a lot of these things laid out here would obviously be incredibly good for the game. If they could get a large chunk of these things added into the game, Diablo 4 would probably be like the best ARPG ever released, because this is just kind of a long list of new systems and content that people would want. A lot of these systems are systems I've been wanting in the game, and I think would just be really good for Diablo 4. So make sure to subscribe, because I'm definitely going to be doing further videos going over some of these possibilities and why I think they'd be so good for the game. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.